Hello and good afternoon. It's nice to see so many people here on this beautiful, finally spring day. I guess we won't know how many people are not here and are at home gardening or whatever. But we're glad that you're here. We have a great concert for you tonight. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. You pass the restrooms on your way in. Just go right back out and turn to the right and you can find them. We also have a donation table, CD table. You can purchase CDs of past concerts, order a CD of today's concert if you'd like. We'd love if you would make a donation to the band. We couldn't exist without your generous support, and we thank you for that. For more information about us, we do have a website, www.nocb.org. And we have a mailing list. If you'd like to get on the mailing list, there's a card on the table out there. Fill out the card and then you'll be sure to receive all the last minute information about our concerts and then upcoming events, and once we get going in the summer again, the next season for next year. We do have a concert coming up in June. It'll be outside at the Wildwood Amphitheater in Orion Township Park. That'll be on Tuesday, June 20th at 7 p.m. So bring a folding chair, bring a blanket, and come out and enjoy the outdoors and the music. And finally, take your cell phone and your watch, put it on silent or turn it off. We thank you very much. And now I'd like to introduce today's MC, Rob Burns.
Thanks very much, Mark. So our music director and conductor, Annette Klein, who you will meet in a moment, has chosen as her theme for this concert, transformations. And sometimes themes are just sort of applied to concerts for convenience sake to give a title. In this case, though, each piece, I think she carefully selected the piece because it had to do with some kind of a transformation. Now, transformation is just a sort of a fancy term for change. But change can be both good and bad. With the word transformation, we're thinking of something that's getting bigger, getting better, getting more complicated. And I think you'll see that is true in these pieces as well. Our first piece is The Thunderer by John Philip Sousa. Now you might wonder, we've heard Sousa before. He wrote 113 marches. How transformative could that have been? Well, Sousa was writing this piece in 1889, which was right around the time where America was trying to find its identity as a musical culture. And Sousa was instrumental in this. He decided he wanted, and I have to quote him here, he wanted to create a new combination of music and instruments unhampered by tradition, which could get at the hearts of the people, the American people. And he worked through his entire career to do just that. And The Thunderer in 1889 came around that time when he was starting to achieve a lot of momentum in that. He created his own band. He was becoming one of the music world's first superstars. So he transformed American music at the time, certainly the sort of classical popular music, if you will, into what we know now as the traditional marching band music. So I will say, please welcome our conductor to the stage, Annette Klein, and listen to The Thunderer. Well, the next piece on the concert has one of the most forbidding names of a piece of concert music that you might encounter. Symphonic Metamorphosis on a theme by Carl Maria von Weber. And unless you're familiar with this piece, you probably have two questions. What's a symphonic metamorphosis? And who was Carl Maria von Weber? Well, let's start at the beginning with Carl Maria von Weber. He was a classical composer, chiefly of operas, but he also wrote sonatas for piano and a couple of memorable clarinet concertos. And he was very famous. He worked in the first quarter of the 1800s. And he wrote a lot of piano duets for two people to sit at one piano, a very popular thing to do back then. And Paul Hindemith, who was a German composer living in the middle part of the 20th century, he and his wife used to like to play these piano duets and for parties and for friends. So he was familiar with this music. And he was approached by a ballet impresario, Leonid Messine, and he was asked to create some ballet music based on the music of Carl Maria von Weber. So Hindemith undertook this. And he wanted to do something a little bit different. He didn't just want to arrange the pieces, he wanted to transform those pieces. Because he spoke with a 20th century idiom, and Carl Maria von Weber was 150 years or 200 years ago, or 150 years before him. So he did just that. And Messine came up to him later and said, well, that's not what I wanted. I just wanted to hear Carl Maria von Weber. So the project kind of fell through. But no composer likes to waste music. So he recast the whole thing into a set of 4 movements, and he called them Symphonic Metamorphosis, another fancy word for change or transformation, on the themes of Carl Maria von Weber. This march comes from one of the piano duets. It's sort of a dark march, as written by von Weber, and Hindemith strove to, and I will quote him again, he wanted to change it. He wanted to make it a little bit more lightly colored and made it a bit sharper, a little bit more biting. So please enjoy the Symphonic Metamorphosis, the march from the Symphonic Metamorphosis by Carl Maria von Weber. Oh, that march from that piece I can't remember the name of. Percy Grainger, a composer who lived at the early part of the 20th century, was an Australian who traveled around the world. He started in Australia, went to England, he worked in the United States, and he was a composer of an interesting composer. It's sort of light music, and yet he put a very much of a classical spin on it. And he wrote many, many pieces for piano, and in the course of his lifetime, he transcribed many of them into works for other ensembles. And the Colonial Song, which we're going to play for you shortly, is just one of those songs. He wrote it as a wordless song for his mother, who was obviously from Australia as well, and was supposed to embody the sorts of songs that they heard in the colonies. Now, we're used to thinking of the United States as the colonies, as an old term for the British, but Australia was a colony as well. So he wrote this, and it's a very interesting piece of music because he wrote it for piano. It was a very pianistic sort of thing. It did things the pianos can do uniquely. And when he transcribed it for military band, or concert band in our case, he kept a lot of those pianistic things in there. So that you've heard the phrase, it goes something like, she played him like a fiddle. And it's usually in some hard-boiled detective-y story when the heroine is sort of manipulating the detective or something. I thought of this because I think during this piece, you will hear Annette conduct us as though playing a piano. So it was Annette's job to make us do things typical of the piano, and you'll hear that at the very end of the piece where there's this unique fade-out that Percy Grainger was able to do. So that's the transformative element here. He transformed a piece of piano music into a big ensemble piece, yet preserved the elements of the piano itself. scared us there for a moment. The applause was not forthcoming. I hope you enjoyed that. And I thought Annette did a fine job, so applause for Annette. Those of you who may know something about the history of classical music in the previous century might recognize the name Sir Thomas Beecham as a prominent conductor in England at the time Percy Grainger was writing his music. And he and Grainger struck up a pretty close relationship, which probably permitted Beecham to say to Grainger when he first heard this piece, "My dear Grainger, you have achieved the almost impossible. You have written the worst piece of modern times." But history shows this. Sir Thomas Beecham is no longer with us, and colonial song lives on. So, hooray for Percy Grainger. Our next piece is To Tame the Perilous Skies. And this one has a story to it. A lot of music is programmatic, and that means it has a program to it or a story. And this one doesn't really describe in any great detail the kind of story, but you're to imagine some sort of a perilous skies. That is, some kind of a dogfight going on in the skies, whether it was an ancient World War I sort of dogfight, or as the composer points out, something that was happening around the time he was writing it, the air fight over Kuwait and Iraq. It's a tribute to the men and women who fly the airplanes and engage in protecting our country, and so it tells that story. And you'll hear when it starts out, it's very ethereal. You're up in the skies. I sort of imagine myself up in a hot air balloon, just minding my own business, as you might in a hot air balloon high up in the sky. And then out of the distance, you hear the drone of engines. And before you know it, you're embroiled in some sort of an air battle. And you hear it going all around you. And you have front row seats to an air battle. And the transformative nature of this song, or tune, is that the first 6 notes you hear played in the band form the themes for the rest of the piece. So listen very carefully to those first notes and see if you can spot all of those themes built off them. This is a piece that transforms the band as well, because I think I speak not only for myself but for the rest of the band, saying this is one of the most challenging pieces we've played, and we're going to pull it off. Taming the Perilous Skies. Thank you very much, and please enjoy your 10, 15-minute interruption. Well, welcome back from the interruption. Sometimes my tongue fails me. We start the second half of the program with a piece called Persis, which is a old way of saying Persia, and which is really good in this microphone, Persia. I'll step back a little bit. I'll avoid the P's. Oh dear. This overture, written by James Jose in the year 2000, is really truly a programmatic piece in that it tells a story. It tells a story that the composer had in his mind when he was writing it. And at the time, he was engaged to his future wife, and he wrote this sort of as a tribute to her. And he tells it as a story of a modern man who finds himself, through means unspecified, back in ancient Persia, 2,000, 4,000 years ago. And he is in this courtyard, and he sees this beautiful woman. It didn't quite hang together for me, that story, so I had to embellish it. So here's my story. A man, a modern American man, I'll say American, why not? He is transported back in time through magical means. And you'll hear in the music that almost instantly he's discovered to be a foreigner, a stranger in a strange land. And he starts being chased. This is what I believe through listening to the music. He starts being chased. It's like an Indiana Jones movie. He's chasing through the streets of Morocco, except this is ancient Persia. And he finds himself through this door, and suddenly he's away from his chasers. And he finds himself in the royal gardens. And there he sees a beautiful woman. And a romance scene ensues. Drop the curtain. But then the guards discover where he has gone. They find him in this royal garden in which no stranger belongs, and they chase him out. And the chase begins again, just as in an Indiana Jones movie, through the streets of Persia. And what happens at the end? That's the big mystery. The ending is kind of tricky. You have to be on your guard. You know those movies where the credits roll and everybody leaves the theater, and then there's that last scene that you really wish you'd stayed for it? That's the kind of ending you have here. So when you think it's over, wait for that last scene. juncture, I would like to send out a happy birthday wish to the mother of one of our flutists, Michelle Pasco. I'd like to have everyone wish Lucy Pasco a happy birthday. Happy birthday. Michelle tells me that it seems like our band concert falls on Lucy's birthday every year, and she sacrifices her birthday cake just to come here, so it's very good. Hope she gets birthday cake later. The next piece by Norman Delajoyo started out its life as a soundtrack to a movie. And this was a documentary movie, and the reason the piece is called Scenes from the Louvre was that it was taken from music written for the movie. That's proper title was The Golden Prison, the Louvre. And now the Louvre is a museum in France that has been many things, and it's been transformed so many times. It started out as a medieval palace, worked its way up through Renaissance palaces, and Napoleon lived there. Oh, there's our P again. Napoleon lived there, and many kings and monarchs and rulers of France lived there. But eventually, it became something of a museum as Napoleon conquered much of the world. He pillaged much of it as well and brought back a lot of treasures there, and they're there to this day. No one had been able to go in and film in the museum because it was thought to damage the art, but a group of, I think, American filmmakers convinced the curators of the museum to let them come in, and they did just that. They filmed in the museum, and they asked Norman Delajoyo to write the music. And because so much of the museum is filled with paintings from the Renaissance and the Baroque era, that the music that he wrote was reminiscent of that. So the transformation here is that he took themes, or actual tunes in many cases, from the Renaissance and the Baroque period, and transformed them into a modern idiom, but not that modern, not like Hindemith, and has given us an impression of some of those paintings in the Louvre, and you'll hear that in the music, I think. And so we will go ahead with that one. I kind of think that the Louvre must be like that time machine that was in the previous piece, Persis, but we can go there and take a trip back in time. So enjoy your travels. Well, for our final piece on the concert, we have arabesque. Now, an arabesque, as a term, is used to describe very ornate architecture, ornaments on architecture. You may have seen such arabesques, curling forms in the shape of vines. You may have seen them on carpets from the Middle East. You may see them on columns in pictures from ancient artifacts. An arabesque is just that, those curlicues, those wonderful ornaments that we see in so much of Middle Eastern art and architecture. And I think Samuel Hazo, who wrote this, also used this as a play on words, because he himself is not of Middle Eastern descent, I don't believe. And so he's writing a piece in an idiom that he's not really a native of. And so in the sense that esque can mean like, oh, he's sort of Dickensian-esque. It means sort of an attempt at an imitation of. Arabesque here, I think, means this is Samuel Hazo doing his best to write a piece of Middle Eastern music. And to do that, he starts out with a couple of traditional forms. He starts out with the taksim, which is an improvisatory piece, probably played, well, it can be played on any instrument, but often is played on the nai, which is a long, slender flute that's devilishly hard to play. It's nothing like the modern flute at all. And in this, the performer is supposed to improvise on the scales that the following pieces are supposed to be crafted in. And it's very free form and ornate. Ornamentation is the transforming element in this piece. Very simple melodies if you pare them down, but they're very ornamented, as you'll hear later. After the taksim comes the dabki, and that is a line dance that you may have seen people doing in movies, or you may have done it yourself. At weddings, typically, you may have seen on Fiddler on the Roof. I did look to see what these sorts of dabkis might be, and there's some wonderful dances out there on YouTube, so check that out if you get a chance. It's just a dance that allows people to do some pretty fancy footwork in the course of the wedding, and it can be chiefly men, and it could be mixed groups as well. And the piece ends with a chorale, which combines the elements of the previous three sections. And so we will present you with a taste of the Middle East.